Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay. Have you guys all been able to open up the questions and everything?
Yes.
Okay, I think the first thing we do is just go around and introduce ourselves. I can start. I'm Claire. I'm a junior and my major is mass communications, with a concentration in public relations.
Hi, I'm Aisha. I am a senior graduating in a week, which is exciting. I'm a dual degree student, so I'm getting a bachelor's of arts in political science and a bachelor's of science in psychology and a minor in biology. And what else was I supposed to answer about myself? That's it. Okay, cool. Yeah. Hi.
I can go next. Hi, my name is Dominique. I'm a senior as well, graduating in a week. My major is criminal justice and political science.
Hey, I'm Gabe. I'm also a senior. I'm a history major, graduating in a week.
Hi, I'm Lexi. I am a psychology major and I get my diploma in August.
Oh, well, congrats everyone. That's exciting.
What about you? Are you also graduating or
No,
no?
I'm a junior,
You
so
said you were a junior,
yeah,
yeah.
I still have time, but that is really exciting. Congratulations.
Nice. Congrats to everybody.
Yeah. Um,
Congratulations.
so do we want to start the icebreaker question?
Sure.
Does someone want to share their screen? We don't have to. We can also just read the questions if everyone has it pulled up and can read it on their own. But if someone wants to share their screen, yeah, we can just read the questions. Okay. Um, so the icebreaker unit during the second half of class did you enjoy the most? Tell us why and be specific. I guess I can start again unless someone really wants to start. But um I don't I guess I think it was unit 9, the tea party, whatever it was, unit, the when the reporter actually went to into those towns and interviewed people. Just thought I guess that was the most interesting to me. Um Yeah, sorry. I don't know why I'm so tired. I'm lacking, but I'll get it together soon. Sorry. Someone else wants to go next.
Can I go next? Okay. The unit I found the most interesting was 10. Even though I personally don't favor Trump, but I thought it was interesting of how much power that you've seen that he had over other Republicans. They basically proved his point when he was they may not like him in the beginning, but they will later. And they all said crazy comments about him on the internet and then basically contradicted themselves and started supporting him after he just said one simple thing to them. Yeah.
Yeah, I also found Unit 10 very interesting, especially about Lindsey Graham and how he just completely changed his mind about Trump, as well as I think a few other people that were mentioned, like Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, who also had said very negative things about Trump originally on live TV, and then suddenly started, worshiping him and overly being nice to him in order to gain power within the Republican Party. They were just kind of sucking themselves up to him to kind of get that power. I felt like whether they agreed with them or with him or not, or whether they probably knew he was wrong, but they still did that. And I found that phenomenon very interesting. I also, honestly, for me, I think Unit 8 was the most interesting. Because I kind of tied together how the election with Al Gore, and how Al Gore said that, I don't want to concede. I don't know if I really lost this election. And then I compared that to the 2020 election with Donald Trump, and how he also was did not want to concede. And I don't know, I think a lot of parallels between the two. I found that unit to be very interesting.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Unit 8, I drew a lot of comparisons with Al Gore and Trump just based off the fact alone that they both, there was they both didn't want to concede, and it was a big deal. I knew nothing about the 2000 election. That was 2 years before I was born, so it was just really interesting to hear about it. I just liked how like it was a clean break for Al Gore eventually, like how he gave his concession speech and it was like just like clear cut, like, we're America, we're gonna move forward, just very positive and compared to Trump and how he handled that whole situation, which was obviously ridiculous. Just found it really interesting, like you said, the parallels and then also how different it was.
My favorite unit was definitely Unit 10, but more so because I'm someone that's very interested in current events in politics. I liked Unit 10 because it is the most recent, but I like drawing parallels from the 2000 election. But most specifically in Unit 10, I enjoyed reading, because I did the transcript, Dr. Reckendorf's conversation with Newman, because I took a comparative politics class. And I enjoy looking at it from a comparative lens of what we're doing versus what other countries are doing, and then what we're doing versus what have we already done. And so I enjoyed getting to read that. And also because they're both professors here, I like their perspective as it draws specifically to being a VCU student.
All right, nice. Okay, so I guess we can start the questions. I feel like it's kind of like confusing the way it's set up this time compared to the way it was set up last time, but maybe that's just me, but we will try our best. Also, I'm not like assuming that I'm the most like qualified to like lead this. If someone wants to jump in, please take over from
My
me.
only question was, do you all just want to go in unit order so it's easier to follow?
Yeah, I think that would probably work best. And there's only Unit 8, 9, and 10. So at least there's that. But so Unit 8, question 1 is required. Well, question 1 has 3 questions, A, B, and C, and all of those are required. And then same with question 2, and then you guys read it and everything, but I'm just walking myself through it right now because it's still confusing. So the first question, what did you know, if anything, about the fallout from the 2020 election prior to listening or reading the ballot battles chapter in the January 6th report?
I think just somebody in this discussion had said they were born 2 years after the 2020 election. I was born 4 years after the 2020 election, so I had no clue, anything about the 2020 election. I didn't even know who the candidates were. But then I remember when I was doing the prep work portfolio, I told my mom that I was doing this, and she clearly remembered the election between Al Gore and Bush, and said that it was like it was a huge phenomenon in the U.S. how he did not want to concede and all of that. I thought it was honestly the most interesting thing to me about the 2020 election, now that I learned about it new and I didn't know about it before, was the concept of the butterfly ballots. I thought it was really interesting how a lot of people in Florida and certain counties, I think it was like Palm Beach and some counties like that, they had these butterfly ballots where it was like the person's name was on one side, and then the like the where you clicked the person, like who you wanted, was on the other side. And so it was set up such a way that people, I'm pretty sure Gore's name was the second one on the list, but in order to click that you wanted to vote for him, you had to pick the third button on the list on the other side. And so people ended up clicking the second one and voting for a third party candidate. And then when they interviewed a lot of people later, people ended up saying that, oh, I meant to vote for Gore. I was really upset in the car driving back when I realized I voted for a third party candidate and not Gore because of the way it was set up. And so I thought that was definitely the biggest reason for the confusion, actually, and like one of the biggest things that made it such an interesting election and such a confusing election. But yeah, I mean, to answer the original question, I didn't know anything about the 2020 election before, but it was very interesting to learn about.
I do have a
2000 election. Yeah.
That was my question, is that it says 2020, but then she talks about 2000 in the red writing.
So question 2 is the same questions, but for the 2000 election, so we can just go off of because that was really good everything you just said. So we can just do question 2 and then go back to question 1 because they're both required. Anyway, if that works. But yeah, just for I didn't know anything about it either at all. It was interesting for sure. The thing, hearing about like how hearing the actual people who accidentally voted that way was really interesting to me. Kind of felt bad for them, but I was also like, I see how it could be confusing, but that's why it's so important to know these things ahead of time. But also, if it's that confusing, it's up to a certain point, that's not really on them, I feel like.
Prior to reading and listening, I knew a little bit about the 2000 election. I tragically just through watching SNL and watching a lot of SNL and watching like old skits about the election. I knew that it was super, super close and that it had come down. I didn't know it was only like one county. I thought that it was like a much larger area that it had come down to between Bush and Gore, and that Gore didn't want to concede. But prior to taking this class, as far as the 2000 presidential election goes, that was kind of all I knew, because I do think, kind of like Gabe had said, like we were all born after it. It's not to say that it's not important, obviously, but it wasn't something that I think is on the forefront of people's brains until the 2020 and 2024 elections, where it felt like history was kind of repeating itself in a sense, at least for people that had been alive and could recollect that election.
And one thing I thought was really interesting was that Gore actually did not want to concede. Like I remember he did not want to not concede. Like he was saying, I'll concede. And then I felt like it wasn't him, it was his like the people in his campaign. There were a lot of, when we were listening to the audio and reading the articles, there were a lot of people pressuring him not to concede. They were telling him, no, just wait, just wait. And so he got influenced by his campaign manager or the people in his campaign not to do that. And I thought it was interesting how just a few hours of time can make such a difference, because it was like at around like 9-10 o'clock, he said he was fine with losing. And then at 3 a.m., he made a phone call to Bush saying that actually I'm not conceding. So it just seemed like he was influenced by other people.
Yeah. Oh,
Sorry. You can go ahead.
okay. The question is, what did I know about the 2000 election beforehand? Like I said before with the icebreaker question, I think I could have guessed like who the candidates were before taking this class. Like I could have put the timeline together and been like, oh, it was probably Bush and Gore. I knew who Al Gore was, probably partially due to South Park, but I didn't really know too much about it, and I just found it really interesting to learn about it. That's why I said it was one of my favorite units. So I virtually do nothing.
To answer that question, to be honest, I didn't know anything either. Again, like it's before our time. I did find it interesting though. I think Lexi had hit on like the whole like all of this, the whole like situation was taking place just in Florida. It's such like a not I don't want to say a small area, but like it wasn't like all over. It was like the whole debate was going on in Florida. You would think it's happening all over, such as like with the 2020 election and like Trump. That debate was going on everywhere. Everyone had an opinion everywhere. And then I also found the butterfly ballots to be interesting as well. Looking at it, honestly, I think I would have got confused myself. I probably would have bubbled in the wrong thing, but that's just off. Like I feel like when people vote, they go in there with a mission and don't necessarily like take the time. But yeah.
All right. So we can just move on to the next part of the second question. In your opinion, what were the most maddening moments of the podcast? What points did you become the most exasperated, disappointed, etc. when learning about the 2000 election? If someone again wants to start, please be my guest. But
Wait, is this for the 2020 election or the
this is
2000?
for the 2000 election.
Oh, okay.
So this is just the second part of the oh wait, no, that was the third question. Sorry, I'm like all messed up now.
No, that's
too.
what I was thinking. I thought it was maddening things about the insurrection at the Capitol, right? Is that what the question was?
There is that question, but there's also
Okay.
the same question for 2000. But
Oh, okay. Sorry.
let me so let's just do it in order. So I meant to say the question that we should go on is, in some ways, the story of the 2000 presidential election sounds like a scripted movie with Florida in the starring role. In what ways did Florida embody the perfect storm there? But okay, here's one I do have a better answer for. I think what made it especially is like the story of the migrant child being found, and then the fiasco with the butterfly ballots. It's always Florida, but it really does sound like a movie. Just all of the events going on at once, and then the election being that close. It's like, yeah.
Can I answer next? Um, I would agree with like the events with the child, how them finding the child like in the water started a whole big uproar and with everybody in their opinions and how that led to like so many big events. I also thought another part that felt like a movie was how long the election lasted. Because that's not typical for like the other ones. So how long it was like dragged out. It's like a movie series where it's like a part one, part two, because they didn't decide until like months later. But yeah.
Yeah, I would agree about I believe his name was Elian Gonzalez, I think. Yeah, I think that when Elian Gonzalez was pulled out of the water, it definitely seemed like the start of a movie for real. And then I think how, it just kind of shaped the politics because became about like, immigration and stuff. And what I really found was interesting was how, like, nowadays like the Republican Party is the one that is has more policies against immigration, and the Democratic Party is more for immigration. Whereas in this case, it was kind of the opposite. And I pointed that out in my prep work portfolio because I remember I think it was the Democrats, I think it was like before that, it was Kennedy. I think it was Kennedy who wanted to send Elian Gonzalez back to Cuba, and a lot of other people, like especially like Cuban people in Florida, they had a big uprising and they were against that. And it definitely seemed like a movie because it wasn't just a plot between two characters. It was larger, like political, social stuff going on. Just like in any movie we watch, there's like larger political, social like themes throughout the movie.
I think that my movie draw comparison more so comes to the actual like margin of difference between the two votes, because I think that it's something that is so just like astronomical to comprehend. Is that when we were listening, it said it's a 0.5% difference. So when they originally counted, it was like 1,700 votes was the difference. And then in the recount, he won by just like 317 votes. And if you think about the entire state of Florida, that probably has like a couple million people in the entire state, to come down to 317 votes is something that is like astronomical to comprehend. And it makes me think about now the difference between 2000 and now when we talk about all of the different ballot issues that we have now, right? So people are like, we should be hand counting ballots. And if you have all of these like automatic ballots, that's how you're faking votes and things like that. I think is a drawback to the 2000 election where voter fraud, which we learned in previous units isn't really that big of an issue, but something that I think could be argued by people that are like, well, Gore didn't actually win and Bush actually won in terms of a movie perspective. I think the other one is the fact that it went all the way to the Supreme Court and it was something based to do with an election. Is I think anytime I think of the Supreme Court and Supreme Court cases, I think of movie level extravagancy because that's like the highest court in the land and you have to meet some bar to be able to go that far anyway. So yeah, I think the fact that it was just 537 votes to me is something that is incredibly wild.
Yeah, for me, I mean, y'all pretty much touched on all of this, but Elian Gonzalez, everything that happened with that, it was the Clinton administration. They in the eyes of because there's a large Cuban population in Florida and southern Florida especially, they had a lot of support from that community. And then I think, if I remember right, they lost a lot of support, and then Gore kind of inherited that. Um, so that was a pretty big issue. Um, and then just like you already touched on about this, but I also found it really interesting was the butterfly ballots and just how those also affected Florida. So you have this shift in people and their allegiances, and then with the Elian Gonzalez situation, and then you have the butterfly ballots, which for some reason the lady that was overseeing the voting in Palm Beach County, even though there was, I'm pretty sure, like a large amount or a large population of elderly people there, gave them like the most confusing ballot that you could possibly give them. You know, like, because I think Dominique, you said that you probably wouldn't have voted correctly, or you would have chosen the wrong person, possibly. I looked at that thing, I was like, bro, what are we doing here? Like, we're gonna give a bunch of older people butterfly ballots, and so yeah, I just think that those things, and then you also had the like physical recounts. You know, like people are locking themselves in the room and they're recounting the votes. I think it was what, like 1% or 10% voting, where they were taking like a sample of the votes from the butterfly ballots to see who they thought the people were actually trying to vote for, because a third party candidate, I'm pretty sure, got a bunch of votes that was supposed to go to Al Gore. So I just, all those factors combined just made a really, really intense situation in old Florida. So it's just really interesting.
Yeah, I think to go off real quick, just I think to go off the point about like how I forget who exactly said it. They thought it was interesting about how it was like a switch. The Republicans wanted to keep Elian Gonzalez in America, and Democrats wanted to send him back to Cuba. I
Yeah,
think
I said that.
a
Yeah.
big, yeah, I think a big like difference with that specific case is his father was wanted him back with him in Cuba, and Americans wanted him out of Cuba because Cuba was a communist country and we were the height of like fighting, communism. And so I think he was really just used as like that poor child was just used as like a pawn as like usual. They didn't like actually care about the kid, that he was just a pawn. If it was probably any other country that wasn't so like politically relevant at the time, I don't know if it would have happened the same way. So I just think that's an interesting part of that case in specific. Um,
Touch
all
on
right.
that about the pawn, about him being used as like a pawn. It was, I forgot the man's name, but the one who like when they were about to like go get the boy from the house, he like ran over there and like the news captured it, and he was trying to like keep the child from being taken.
Yeah.
I thought, like, not saying it was dramatic, but like that also gave movie, because somewhere in the beginning they one of his relatives even said that like he's using this for publicity, and then he did that, and then like it was captured that he did that. So yeah.
Wasn't that one of the dudes that found Elion?
Yeah, I
Elion?
think
Okay.
so.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think that poor kid was just like the victim of a horrible like political stunt. Um, anyway, the last part of question two, the one I had read by accident. In your opinion, what were the most maddening moments of the podcast? When did you feel most exasperated, disappointed, etc. about the 2000 election? I think for me, it was probably that situation with the kid because it's just the actual issue is being ignored that his mom risked like died, and like the actual issue was being ignored, that like these people are so desperate to escape the country that they're in and come here for safety or whatever, are like going to such extents, and instead of like using that situation as like a moment to emphasize that, it was just the kid, like I said, became a pawn.
I think it's disappointing to see uh people being used as pawns for him. being used by politics for political gain because you're an immigrant. Like Gabe had touched on earlier, and I think Aisha had touched on earlier a little bit as well. Especially when the Republican Party now is someone that is so staunchly, not necessarily, I mean, anti-immigrant, but like more so like making sure you're doing it the proper way, and like we're not going to put these people on pedestals because, you know, we want you to be entering the country the right way, and then to kind of go on the flip and exploit him for your own political gain, I think is disappointing. I feel that we should be such a lead by example country. And I think that Bush, this is prior to 9/11, so he wasn't necessarily in everybody's like most fantastic graces, i.e. the margin of difference in Florida. I think is kind of like grasping for straws, and I think it's disappointing to see.
I can go. Something that really ticked me off was like we were comparing the 2020 election and the 2000 election and how the losing presidential candidate didn't want to concede. Obviously, Trump, as we learned and we'll touch on later, wasn't going to concede no matter what data he was shown. But Al Gore definitely, like, there was a large amount of gray area to, especially like specifically in Florida, obviously, like ultimately in Florida, that led to a ton of gray area about whether or not Gore or Bush won the election, and the Republican Party was spinning this narrative that Gore was trying to cheat his way into winning the election and buying time to cheat his way into winning the election, and that was really annoying because like, how could you possibly think if the votes are that close and there is so much going on in the state of Florida, like, why would, like, I don't know how somebody could look at all of the evidence and say, yeah, we don't need a recount. So that was really annoying to me. Um, just this trying to stop the recount because personally, I believe that the recount was absolutely necessary.
I would agree. Actually, I was going to say the same thing, that that was the most agitating thing to me about the 2000 election was the fact that actually the butterfly ballot itself was agitating because it was like, okay, you're seeing that these people are upset because they're they're on this audio, they're saying that they did not get to vote for the person they wanted to, and it was because of the design of the ballot. And I understand that the ballot was such a way because apparently they were trying to make it more accessible for people. They were saying that it was more legible, the names were written bigger for people with eyesight issues and things like that. They were able to see the names better, but then they saw, even if it was like for originally came out of a good cause, like it originally was like supposed to be a good thing because it was supposed to be more accessible, they saw the confusion it caused and they heard people saying they didn't vote for the right person, and they still did not want to recount the votes. Like they still were very, very stubborn about doing a recount, and I think that was a very agitating thing about the 2000 election as well. Yeah.
To answer the question, actually gonna like piggyback off what Claire and Lexi said about the whole like involving the boy, them using it for public gain and like America, like, being like a Levi. Yeah. But the part where it was like it was episode 1, um, after the Clinton administration had like said they wanted to like return the boy back to his country, Al Gore's first like thought was worrying about his stance with Cuban voters in the election. And that like goes to show like they weren't necessarily worried about like the safety of the boy, what's going on, but like the voters who was going to vote for him as far as like where his stance was.
Yeah, I agree. I just had a real quick thought. Because it's already 7:30 and we go until 8:30. Do we want, and we can either like keep going as usual, or if we want to like skip to another unit so we can at least try to get in like one question from each unit, or if we have like a unit because I think people said they really wanted to talk about unit 10. She said that we don't have to stay after 8:30 if we don't get to all the questions. So if you guys want to keep going in order, I'm
Also,
fine with either.
okay, so there's also only 5 of us. So it's 8:15 unless you all want to stay until 8:30. That's
Oh.
also because we were supposed to have 6 people and we have 5.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I'm fine with either one. I just wanted to throw that out there because I know some people said they we're really interested in unit 10 if we wanted to like, I don't think she'll take off.
Yeah, we could try to like hit each unit at least so we show her that we talked about like everything at least a little bit.
Yeah, I don't
We
think
could do
she'll.
that. Yeah.
Okay,
We could
so
do
do we
like
want,
a question from each unit is what you're saying, and then come back and do
And
whatever.
then come back, yeah.
Okay.
if we have time, but as we're
Okay.
going right now, I don't know if we'll have time for all of them, which isn't a problem, but. So do we want to go straight to unit 9 or do we want to go to unit 10, unit 9? Okay. Okay, okay. So question 5, required to choose at least one. So we just choose one of the cells. Okay. Does anyone have a strong preference?
Right, I'm gonna look.
Yeah, there's like a lot to read, so I don't know if you guys want me reading all of this.
Yeah, give me 1 second, just because my computer's slow.
Yeah, no worries.
What's y'all's opinion on like the middle one?
Sorry, what was that?
Like your opinion on like answering the middle column.
Yeah, I was leaning towards either the middle one or the right one. So I'm fine with either one.
Yeah, I'm cool with either one.
All right, do we want to do the middle one? So, although references to an organized Tea Party were fading by 2016, how did the Tea Party's success foreshadow Trump's rise to prominence in the Republican Party? Do we think there would have been a President Trump if not for the Tea Party? I personally do. I think, unfortunately, I don't know if necessarily, well, I don't know actually. I don't know if he would have become, that's really hard to say.
I think my
I
thoughts
think sorry. No, you go, sorry.
think my thoughts with President Trump stem specifically from him as a person and who he was before he became a politician, because I think the whole thing is he is not a politician. I think that you can take the Tea Party out of it and we look at it specifically as we have this rise of people with the fading of the Tea Party that are tired of your traditional politician. And here comes this person that is a TV celebrity. People know him, people recognize his voice, and he's staunchly different than everyone else on the stage. And I think that that is captivating to people because people wanted change and they wanted someone who wasn't their traditional politician. I think that a lot of people that support Trump can be characterized as people that are, I want to say, bigoted in a lot of senses, but you do have people that are still Trump supporters that were staunch supporters of Bush, who, like Gabe touched on earlier and Aisha touched on, who had previously been against Trump, so like Marco Rubio and JD Vance, who are captivated, I think, by his success. And so I think that Trump is his own entity outside of any political ideology. I think without the Tea Party's influence, like Claire had said, it's hard to say what would have come about. But I think that America was leaning more towards having a politician who wasn't a politician anyway, and he kind of filled that power vacuum.
I would completely agree. I was gonna say I really don't think that the Tea Party being there or not really affected Trump's rise to power. I think that Trump, like you said, he's not a politician. He's somebody that he kind of captivates people. There were so many examples given in a different unit than this about people who, like you said, I think it was Marco Rubio, there was Ted Cruz, there were a lot of people who Lindsey Graham was a lot of the unit was about Lindsey Graham. I'm pretty sure Lindsey Graham called Trump a kook, I believe, and a bigot, I think, before trying to use Trump to get power. And I think a lot of people like that voted for Trump, that doesn't mean they love Trump. That means that a lot of people who went along with Trump, it doesn't mean they love Trump. They probably know he's wrong, but they used him in order to get power for themselves or to get their legislation to work or something like that. And so I really don't think the Tea Party really affected that. I think the Tea Party had a lot of other massive, like, it caused massive fundamental changes within the Republican Party itself. I think there were a lot of, it was almost like an extremist group, but not an extremist, because I remember what I found really interesting in the prep work portfolio was it said that a lot of the deep red states that are the most Republican and always vote Republican are not the ones that voted for the Tea Party or that liked the Tea Party. It was states that were moderately Republican. So I don't want to say the Tea Party was like exactly an extremist conservative version, even though they were quite extreme conservatives. I don't know, because I don't know why. I thought that was interesting. I didn't know why the deep red states didn't want the Tea Party, but I think they were an organization or like a faction within the Republican Party that definitely shaped the landscape of the GOP a bit. But I don't think Trump's rise to power really had anything to do with that.
I want to piggyback off what you and Lexi said about like Trump being his own, and yeah, but basically like in Unit 10, where like you were seeing all of the Republicans like flip and like keep flipping, and it was somewhere in one of the episodes of like the podcast where they said like they thought they were manipulating Trump, but Trump was manipulating them. It just goes to show like he knew what he had to say to get them to flip. So I honestly don't think like I think he could have done the same with and without the Tea Party. Like he was very confident in his ways of manipulating them. And it like showed with his, with his winning. But yeah.
I remember even something about the COVID-19 pandemic. They said that Trump supporters believed that the pandemic was over when Trump said it was, or something like that. Like the minute Trump said that, like, oh, the pandemic's over, guys, don't worry. Like everybody suddenly thought like, oh, Trump is like the law of the land. He must be right about this, and that they like stopped wearing a mask or they didn't like worry about it anymore. And I think that just goes to show how convincing Trump is, how people will just listen to him. And I don't think that any faction or party could have taken him there.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, the Tea Party is obviously an insurgent faction, and they're just really hell bent on getting who they want, um, as far as they can go, with complete disregard. I would say I would say complete disregard to whether or not they affect the outcome of an election, meaning like if they can get who they want to run for the Republican ticket, then even if that might be like the weaker candidate who's going to inevitably lose to the Democratic candidate, they will do that. Which I guess is like that's crazy to me. I knew nothing about the Tea Party before this. But like y'all said, I still think that, I mean, given like JD Vance, even, who is obviously the vice president of the United States with Donald Trump, like badmouth, like, I'm not even gonna say badmouth because a lot of it was legit. Like, there, I will, like, he will never be president. This is why. And now they're all working for him and they love him to death. So despite like the Tea Party's best efforts and lack of regard for the Republican Party as a whole, I still think that Trump would probably have made it to where he's at, uh, even if or without the Tea Party or with the Tea Party. I don't think it mattered.
Yeah.
I do have one counterpoint to yours of I think that examples like Marco Rubio and JD Vance, I don't think that they love Trump the way that promoters of the Tea Party loved the people that they would put up. I think that they love what they can gain. And I think that for them, they think more politically and more in political gain. As seen in JD Vance being whatever, like okay, that's my dog. Being a bit of a politician.
Yeah, I agree with you. I didn't mean to word it like that. I thought that they actually love Trump, because clearly they don't until they want something from him, and they're just riding the hot hand. They're just like, oh, that guy wins. I can be vice president. I hate him, but I'm gonna bite the bullet and I'm gonna just ride with him because he can get me where I want to be. So yeah, when I said they love him, I mean like they are heavily reliant on him for everything.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think it's like a mix of what they love, what they can gain from him, and people are also scared of him. which makes sense. I mean, still stand up, but anyway, unless anyone has something else to add, next question. All right. Do you think that a left-wing group could mimic the efforts of the Tea Party and find the same success within the Democratic Party? Should they? And if so, how? Why not? So, me personally, I think that not in the same way. I think a lot of it is like, just not as blatant like racism that appeals to like that's so appealing to these people, like Trump supporters, and actually blatant racism too, like just white supremacism. I think whether they like ever gonna admit it or not, like that's what they find, so a lot of them at least find so appealing. And just the fact that he can do and say anything and nothing, it doesn't affect literally anything. He's like literally a criminal and it doesn't matter. I think they view him as like this supreme like person who's literally incapable of like ever being held accountable, which I mean, he hasn't been really, so makes sense. But so I don't think, and I think the left wing is not, you're not going to find the same success, because I don't think it's, at least in the past few decades, I don't think there's still been racism for sure, but it's definitely not been so overt, so like what draws people in. So that's my opinion on it.
I would agree. I was gonna say the same thing, that I feel like the left wing would not make a party like this. And the reason why is because I feel like a lot of times parties like this form over a lot of the reason the Tea Party even formed was because of anger or communal like fear over something. See, the Democrats don't really have fear over things. The Democrats aren't like, oh, these immigrants are coming in the country, we're scared of them. This is a fear. Oh my gosh, we should band together because like these people are like separate, different from us. The Democratic Party kind of sees people as more equally, and they're not like fearing a certain group, I would say. But I think the Republican Party does not. They kind of fear certain groups. And so I feel like the Tea Party came about over a communal sense of fear. And I feel like because they were saying that the causes of the Tea Party included fear and over the election of Obama, and it included fear. I don't know why my camera moves up and down like that. I don't know. Anyway, sorry. Like it was like fear over like the election where Obama was elected president because they saw him as an outsider. It was fear over I think the 2008 recession, I believe, was one of the things that caused the Tea Party. And so I think those kind of causes were the causes for that. And I feel like I really couldn't see that happening with the left wing, because there's not going to be that kind of anti-rhetoric of we're anti. I think a lot of them were anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant. There was a lot of rhetoric going on that I just couldn't see. And there was anti-abortion rhetoric. Like they were banding over a lot of causes because of fear towards those things happening. And I just don't see the Democrats or the left-wing people doing that.
I'm gonna piggyback off of what you said, sort of. So when you said like they were fear of like anti-Muslim, anti like abortion, I feel like the left, like the left wing couldn't like mimic it to the extent that like the other side did, because in a way I feel like Republicans have a difficult time with separating church and state, and a lot of their ideologies are based off of church. And I feel like a lot of Republicans, they know that and they use that tactic to manipulate them, such as Trump. Trump brings up God a lot, though I feel like his views of like God is different than any other Republicans' views of God. And I feel like with the Democratic Party, they're not afraid to voice their opinions against one another. Like if they have a different belief or sway this way, the Democratic Party will say that to one another. Though with like the Republican Party, they're very much conform to each other's beliefs. So like when she was like talking about like example like her parents and like how they like in a way associated a lot of things with evil this, evil that. And I feel like that's why I don't think the Democratic Party could mimic it to the extent that the Republican Party can. Because the Democratic Party does a very great job of separating church and state. And I feel like that's like low-key the bottom of a lot of issues. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes sense later.
Gabe, if you're talking, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, my girlfriend's sister's got a wasp in her room, and so she was.
Oh, that's scary.
Can't do it right now. I would I I don't want to answer the question with I don't know, but I did see. I mean, we did see an example. I don't like, especially with people that I know at VCU or other college-aged individuals who were accelerationists, and they did not vote for Kamala Harris because they voted for somebody that was, who they saw as even more progressive. I don't think that that had a direct result on the outcome of the election. I don't think like, oh, well, Kamala would have won if all these leftist 20-year-old college kids didn't vote and be or weren't accelerationists. But I think it's definitely something to like keep your eye on for future elections because it could create a division within the progressive or like left wing political sphere. Um, but yeah, I think I would honestly agree with y'all. I don't think that there would be, at least now, as much success if a group were to do that, because like I said, it wasn't like the determining factor of the outcome of the election this past election. But I think it's definitely something that, because they basically like how I see it is like, like I said, the Tea Party will try to put whoever they feel like is the best candidate without regard to really how it could affect the Republican Party as a whole. Accelerationists and like people that are leftists and vote leftists, because there's a lot of leftists that, you know, do the harm reduction method and then vote for whoever's on the Democratic ticket, like Kamala Harris. But those that don't are basically doing the same thing. They're voting. Uh, they're more extreme in their views, or at least more extreme in their voting, and then they're kind of disregarding how that could affect the left in general. That's how I feel about it. Kind of parallels.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. All right, do we want to move on to Unit 10? Okay. So Unit 10, question number 6 required 2 parts. So the first part of question 6 is, what did you know, if anything, about the political scandals and or impeachment charges brought against Trump by the Democrats or other topics covered in the Lindsey Graham podcast? I knew, well, I think we all knew that he is a criminal, like as of just this past, or that wasn't that was this past summer, right? Or this past year, recently-ish. He was convicted of however many charges. And then I remember the impeachment trial the first time. I think he was technically impeached, but it wasn't passed through like one of the houses, I forget, or something. I knew that he had had his fair share of either political scandals or impeachment attempts, but I didn't know the specifics. I think there are too many to count, honestly.
I can answer next. The only parts of like I knew about like before, learning all this, I knew, like you said, that he was a criminal. I knew about like the whole like Republicans flipping. That was very like prominent in like the media. The media talked about it a lot, about like the different people who were once on his side, but after his second attempt at well, he ended up being president again, but changed their minds and everything on how they felt towards him. Honestly, I did not know about Lindsey Graham a lot. I really didn't. So that was not shocking, but new for me to learn. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with the first impeachment, which was in 2020, um, right? Obviously we all know about January 6th and stuff like that, but um, it's very, I didn't know anything about the details behind it and just like how, because I didn't really think in depth about it. Um, but I just didn't realize just how much he was doing. I guess maybe behind the scenes isn't the right word, but to me, it was behind this. Like, oh, he like incited a coup at the Capitol building. That's enough for me to be like, this is a bad dude. But what was going on behind the scenes was I had no idea about.
Yeah, I didn't know how much he provoked the incident at the Capitol. I thought a bunch of like, Republican people who really strongly like wanted Trump in power just decided to go raid the Capitol. I didn't know that he sent that Twitter message the day before. I was reading on the article that they said that, or a podcast or something, they were saying that he said that like be wild, or there was some phrase he used like go on, be wild, or something like that on Twitter, and he wasn't very clear what he meant, but it seemed like he almost set it up because by saying that, then a bunch of people went, and they said that he had many chances during the insurrection to stop it, but he continued to support it on Twitter while it was happening. He, shot down a lot of things that people who were trying to stop it were saying things to him, and he disobeyed them. He said something about Mike Pence, I think, during the insurrection, and he wrote stuff. If I'm right about that, yeah. And then he wrote stuff on Twitter during the insurrection, but I didn't know that he kind of provoked it by, sending that original Twitter message.
When January 6th happened, I was in an AP US class, like in our Zoom meeting at the time, because it was COVID. And I remember a lot of us like left the class early. We were like, hey, Miss Bellevue, there was a lot of stuff happening. Like we'd like to watch it and be in the know or whatever. Um, Prior to us listening to the podcast, I feel like I knew a pretty good amount about the political scandals and impeachment charges. Like I said, I really enjoy current events and politics, and obviously The Daily Show. And so being able to watch like interviewers like Jordan Klepper who were there on January 6th and have like interviewed Congress members about impeachment trials and keeping up with those things has always been very interesting to me. Like Claire had pointed out earlier, he was impeached twice but not convicted either time. So it's interesting to me that you can have the House, which is the elected body by the people, impeach someone and basically say, like, we don't want this man to be president, and then the Senate to be like, oh, that, well, that sucks. So I think that that's incredibly interesting. Also, the fact that he's the only president to be impeached twice and not convicted either time. I think it's kind of like where they're like, oh my God, you're living through history. And I'm like, okay, I'm tired of that. So I think that it was incredibly interesting to watch. And I think that he is nothing short of a very history-making president, whether that be positive or negative. And so being able to learn about him in this class and outside has been very interesting.
Yeah, definitely history making, better for worse. So this next part of the question, in your opinion, what were the most interesting, surprising, maddening, etc. aspects of Lindsey Graham's behavior that was covered in the podcast? Focus on Graham for this question. For me, it was just overall he's such a like grifter. He's so self-interested. At one point, he had like before he had lost or before Trump won the candidacy and everything, Graham had said he'd rather lose without Trump than try to win with him. He had said he was unqualified. He said a bunch of things about Trump, and then it was like the minute Trump got more power, and Graham thought, maybe I can get in a position in foreign policy, maybe. Then he starts being, then his tone shifts completely. And also in the interview, like I thought it was interesting how you could like tell Graham is just like pulling things out of his ass. Like he's just like making excuses out of nothing, trying to like justify his Trump's behavior when in any other circumstance he just went and look how it worked out for him. Like Trump didn't listen to him on anything. Duh. But yeah, I think that was just the most interesting part.
I can answer next. What I thought was like the most interesting, kind of like what you said, was how in the beginning he was so like against Trump. He said so many things about Trump, had a whole bunch of like words of like to describe Trump. And then when Trump, I think it was like that one phone call, changed his mind. He's like, oh, like, you know, like you said, the whole like, oh, I can get like into foreign policy. And then it was after a while of him like supporting Trump. I don't know if it's the interviewer or if he said it, but like he had became so good at BSing for Trump and backing up Trump's lies and coming up with answers. And then at one point he quoted, sorry, 1 second. Where is it? He told the reporters that basically that Trump was a lying MF and predicted that the Republicans in the Congress would stand by the president no matter what. But that was during the time after he changed his feelings towards Trump. So I thought it was like, oh wow, like, okay, you know that you still know that Trump is wrong. You're still like, if you think personally against some of the things that he do, but for your own political gain, and you know how crazy it would be for you to like change all of a sudden, he still decided to keep on the path of supporting him. But yeah, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I thought the most one of the most agitating things about him, like you said, was like he was very like hypocritical almost. Like he was a big hypocrite because he was like he acted like he loved Trump and then he knew what Trump was doing was wrong all along. He wasn't naive. Like he paints himself to be very naive, but we all like know he's not naive. One specific example was I remember there was a meeting about like countries and he said I remember Trump said something he called El Salvador and Haiti and some African nations like shithole countries. He said like why are all these people coming in from like shithole countries or something like that. And I remember like in the interview Lindsey Graham said that like oh, you know, Trump shouldn't have said that. I know that that was wrong. And I told him that behind closed doors, but then he didn't say anything during the meeting. Like he didn't try to, or if he said something, it was like he still was siding with Trump. And it was like, you know, he's going behind Trump's back and talking bad about him behind his back and saying the truth about how he feels about things behind his back. But when he goes to the media and he goes to the news, he's acting like a total hypocrite and flipping it up and saying that he agrees with all these things. So I just didn't like the lack of morality. I felt like if you're a person with good morals, you defend what's right and you defend your morals every time rather than defending your friend or the person you want in power. And instead of defending what's morally right, he defended Trump and then said behind closed doors that I know Trump is not morally right, but I just defended him because, you know, I need him and this, that. So yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, I mean mine's just absolutely gonna piggyback off of what y'all have already said and what we've talked about even before getting onto this question. With like JD Vance and stuff like that, but specifically Lindsey Graham, you know, like I remember now like, when Trump first got impeached, it was over him trying to establish foreign influence into the election, like from Ukraine, I'm pretty sure. And Lindsey Graham was there to defend him. He's done some extremely racially charged things, and Lindsey Graham was there to defend him, despite calling him a lying MFer, which was exactly the point I was going to bring up. And then Dominique, you said it before me. Because you know, you remember when you hear somebody say something like that, you know. So it's just like it's just crazy to me. I mean, it just how blatant it is. Like, I don't understand how somebody could so blatantly go against their morals, especially when there's real world impacts. You know, like it's not like he's just like it's like your friend and he hypes you up even though like even if you did something wrong, you know, it's like these have real world consequences and this dude is excusing his disgusting behavior um without regard to the American people, to anybody in the world, really. And just to see the pattern of that over and over again is pretty wild to me. So basically just saying exactly what y'all said, but you know.
I think it's surprising that it took Lindsey Graham that long to switch on Trump, especially because he's someone that goes after his own um interests. I think Claire described him as like a grifter earlier, and I think that's a really great way to point him out. I think that he is someone that every step of his political career has been very evident in doing what is best for him. I think he's very, very similar to Trump and very similar to all Trump supporters, where it's what can benefit me in the long run. But I think that it's surprising it took him so long to switch up when he realized that Trump and him are so similar and that there was no actual, I don't want to say camaraderie, but like that trust in between like someone that you're working with.
Yep, great point. So we have 15 minutes. Do we want to go back to the first question on Unit 8? That was about the 2020 election on January 6th. I feel like that might be the most interesting to talk about in the last 15 minutes. Does that sound good to everyone? Okay, so the first question was, what did you know, if anything, about the 2020 election prior? I think, about the fallout to the 2020 election, I think especially since we grew up well, at least I'm assuming most of us grew up in Nova, or not in Nova, at least Virginia. But I grew up in Nova, so right outside DC, and my parents all my life were federal government employees. So I remember even like them just being horrified, like as to like what was going on. And I remember that day when it happened too. I think I was also like in a Zoom class, and my dad like called up to me and he was like, "They're storming the Capitol" or something. And I was like, okay, because I just like didn't understand the significance at first until I like opened Twitter and I was like, oh my God. Um, but yeah, I think growing up that close to DC and having federal government employee parents, the 2020 election I'll never like get past that. And I'll like never understand how anyone saw that and voted for him another time. I will just never be able to comprehend that. I don't think there's like any other excuse or reason for it other than like immoral beliefs and values. Um, so yeah, that was my stance.
I think on the flip side of that, I'm from Chesapeake, so the very southern part of Virginia. And so, before the 2020, like I guess the fallout of the 2020 election, I think was a huge thing in my community because it's a very rural community. It's a very military heavy community. There were people in my community that were there that I remember like posting pictures on Instagram and Snapchat of them like at like the January 6th. The rally portion, I've got nothing for the Capitol. I don't know who was there, but like on the actual like rally, like we support our president, whatever. I literally remember kids I went to high school with that went with their parents, and it was like this huge thing. So yeah, so on the flip side of yours, like I think that I had very large portions of my community that were very upset because they are military affiliated or they're rural, and so they were very heavily Trump supporters. And like you had said, we grew up with it, and so we grew up surrounded by it. And we were in Zoom classes, and those were things that were very prominent. And now, as we're taking classes like this, I think every election since 2020 in some way bears the consequence of that fallout. Like when there was the transfer of power from Biden back to Trump. And I remember on NBC, they were like, and look at that. Just a peaceful transfer of power. Like that's just such a beautiful moment. And then it was the Daily Show. It cut to Jon Stewart, and he was like, that's how they're all supposed to be. Like, let's be honest, you didn't know what January 6th was before January 6th. Like, you didn't know that was the day that they counted the votes. And like you didn't. And so it was very interesting to me that it now has such huge consequences, I think, on all future elections.
Yeah, I was gonna say, piggybacking off of that, I am from Williamsburg, Virginia, so also southern part of Virginia, similar, like pretty much like just an hour away from where you live, close by to that. And so it's also a very rural community. I remember, so I didn't have Zoom class, I actually had in-person class, and I remember going to school, and I remember my AP US history class was my first block that day, and everybody was talking about like the January 6th, the insurrection, but people were saying it in the opposite way as me. They were saying like, oh, good for them. I'm so glad they went and, spoke their voice because, Trump should have been our president. He was cheated. And I remember thinking like, what? Like, no, why would you do that? But anyways, I remember I think when doing this prep work portfolio, I was just comparing the Gore election and this and thinking that, you know, the Al Gore election was actually messy. It actually had a valid basis or claim for like somebody could have like you said, it was such a narrow margin, right? It could have gone either way. I could see why Gore would have been upset, or Gore supporters would have been more upset with all the confusions with the butterfly ballot and all that. But yet the Democrats, they still did not storm the Capitol in 2000 when that happened. And I was just thinking how there was no base for any of Trump's claims. The election was not that close like it was in 2000, if I'm correct. The 2020 election, it started even before. I thought it was interesting that even before January, like it was like in the months leading up to that, he was already making false claims. He was already, he said something about the Georgia didn't count their votes right, or they threw out their votes or something. And he was saying something about, I think it was Idaho or Iowa or something, their caucus made a mistake. And I just think it's interesting that he's already making accusations leading up to this, and then he makes that final accusation that, oh, the election is rigged. And yeah, I didn't see where the basis of the claim for that was.
Yeah, so I knew I mean, I'm not gonna say I knew. I disagreed with what happened on January 6th. Obviously, I feel like everybody in this group probably did. Um, what I had understood at that point was that the votes had been counted, and that the people were angry. The hardcore right wing Trump supporters were very angry, and then they did something really stupid and they stormed the Capitol. What I did not know before all of that is how predetermined it was, like I thought, and I think a lot of people thought, and in some way, maybe in some ways it kind of was, but honestly, to be honest with you, I don't really think it was like a spur of the moment, spontaneous, like we're angry and oh, we're here, let's storm the Capitol now. I think it was extremely deliberate. Like we learned, Trump was not going to concede peacefully, and he was always planning on you know, saying that he didn't lose. Like he didn't just like they count the votes, he lost, and he was like, "Oh well, I'm not going to concede." Like he knew that he was, if he lost the election beforehand, that he was not going to concede like peacefully. At least, like he was going to go down claiming that he won. I did not know that. I thought that was really interesting. He had like a bunch of tweets that would like allude to the fact that he knew that something was coming, like some sort of very extreme reaction was coming. I didn't know that because I'm not a big like social media Twitter guy, even back then. And so I didn't know that either. So I just found that like insane. And just how polarizing, like it made the country in a lot of ways, like how it just really shifted people. I don't think this specific incident shifted people very right and very left, but I think it definitely contributed. Then I think also it gave the Republican community the ability to call every single election rigged and to behave that way because they weren't met with as harsh of consequence as I would have thought they were. Because you break into the Capitol building, if it was anybody, any other group of people, you would assume, like, not to be morbid, but that they would probably be shot. And they were not. I think like maybe one person got shot. So yeah, what I had thought I had known about the what happened on January 6th did not line up with what actually happened and just how deeply predetermined it was.
Yeah. Oh wait, Dominic, sorry. I'm
Oh no, you're good. To answer the question, honestly, as far as like what I knew, I feel like once the 2020 election like hit, everybody was paying attention a lot because they were so worried that he would get elected a second time. And then after the January 6th thing, I think I was not aware of like how how it was like pre-planned and everything, but afterwards, how much fear it instilled into everyone because everyone was like, if you can storm the Capitol, how much further can you go? So I remember like how much fear everyone had at that time. And then it was like right in the middle of COVID. So we were already like feared, like, okay, when are we going to get out of this? And then that was just on top of that. So I do remember the fear that that whole situation created.
Yeah, I think one thing that really stuck out to me is I remember because like I said, my parents were federal government employees. My mom worked for Homeland Security, so she like eventually got like a bunch of her and people from her office were called into DC in the hours after January 6th just to like be there. And then so my parents were like really invested in it. And then I remember in the weeks or however long after when I don't know if it was CNN, some channel, someone where was airing like footage of it. Like I was watching it with my parents, just like horrified because this party that claims to like back the blue so much is literally beating the like office Capitol officers did die and like it was really horrible. They showed up, it was pre-planned, like they showed up with weapons, they showed up with that intent. It was like horrifying. And I really think, at least for me and like a bunch of the kids around me, not all of them, because there were certainly, I don't know, I didn't know anyone that was there, but there were certainly like people leaning the other way too. Like just watching that happen so close, it was like it was just horrifying. And I also agree with your point, Gabe. Like if it was any other group of people, they would have been shot on sight immediately. I mean, we saw that in the months before with the Black Lives Matter protests. So yeah, it's just, and I think the second part of the question, I know we only have like 4 minutes, but the second part of the question was just like, how did reading through the January 6th report make you feel about US politics? And I was just, it's just like shocking, discouraging, sad. Those are the only words I can really think of for it.
Can I to piggyback off you, I agree. It was very sad and discouraging. How you brought up like the Black Lives Matter protest, seeing how the whole thing transpired with how much police force happened, how much like the community was targeted. But as soon as they stormed the Capitol, it took them a very long time. I believe I forgot how many what was the time that they said, but it was a very long time for them to even say anything about the situation. It shocked me at how much like when it's a simple peaceful protest, they have so many police on standby, ready to call it something like say that it was, oh, they weren't peaceful, blah blah blah. But with the January 6th thing, they did not have as many police and support on standby like they should have, even though they actually got violent off the jump with that. And it was something that their president told them to do, which is like even more shocking. Like, wow, you were so against everyone else actually protesting for a valid reason, but because you lost, you wanted them to storm a Capitol. And it just showed how much the government does not back their people, even though like they put their own workers at risk because they didn't want to jump in. It was actually very crazy and sad to think about.
I think it makes me interested to see where contemporary politics will move. I think, especially, I did the current events quiz today, and there was like an article in there about the introduction of a bill from a Tennessee representative or senator about allowing someone to run for a third term when their 2 terms aren't consecutive. And I think that reading through the January 6th report and also everything that we know about January 6th, it makes me nervous about contemporary politics and the inability for those in power to give up power. And I think that's something that's always like come up for conversation when you look at like representatives and senators that just continuously run and just like never step down, like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell. But then those are senators and representatives, and yeah, they make huge changes, but then on a president where that is like essentially like the face of your company, but the face of your country, it's very scary to think about the effects that that will have moving forward.
Yeah, it's
No,
kind of, oh, sorry. No, you talk.
we don't like have any time left, but I will say that from the January 6th report, what I got is just a keen awareness of how we are living in history right now that is going to be told for a very long time, which is a scary feeling. Like, I personally want to live in a time where nobody knows what was going on because everything was like chill and everybody was fine. But it really, like, I had this strong sense of like, oh wow, like 200 years from now, when high schoolers are reading their textbooks, they're going to be like, oh wow, like that was messed up, like that was crazy. I can't believe that happened, you know? So that's just really what it gave me, is just a sense of like, holy, you know, what is going on? Like, yeah.
All right, well, it's 8:15. So good job, everyone. And congrats everybody who's graduating. That's exciting.
Lovely chatting
Thank
with you.
you.
It was nice talking to all you guys, and it was a great discussion. I wish you all the best with future and summer and graduating.
Did we just hang up the call?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so, yeah.
Best of luck.
All right. We'll see you.
Bye. Nice to
Bye.